Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, one of the civic partners for this show. Today we have Ginger Storey-Welch with us in the studio. We're going to be talking about the People's Climate March and social justice issues. Ginger, welcome back. You've been a guest before on the show. You're the leader of the North Country 350 Alliance. And so we've talked before about climate issues, sustainability, and now we're going to be talking about social activism.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, it's a pleasure. A lot of the social activism that we've actually seen has occurred since the election and certainly since the inauguration, and it has manifested itself in many, many ways in terms of people getting out in the street, even here in the North Country, where January, February, and March have not been great weathers for getting out, or great weather for getting out in the street. You actually went down to the Women's March, which was in January on the day after the inauguration, and that's not the first time that women have marched in the street around an inauguration. The first time was in 1913, and 500 women were marching for suffrage in President Wilson's inauguration. So tell us a little bit about that experience, what you saw, what you thought, what you felt, what kind of energy was in that crowd.
I think I'd like to start with why I went.
Okay.
My grandmothers were born around 1900. They were born into a world where it was illegal for women to vote. It was illegal for women to own property after they were married. It was illegal for women to control their own wages after they were married. And it was legal for their husbands to beat them, and etc. And the last 100 years have been a time of expanding opportunities for women. But I am feeling like we're starting to go backwards. And I have a daughter, and I have 4 granddaughters, and I have multiple younger women, former students, friends, nieces that I care about. And on their behalf, I went to Washington, D.C., because to me there's just absolutely no going back. And I'm worried about that. I was talking to a younger woman the other day who said that her husband works with a woman who believes the 19th Amendment should be repealed. Yeah, she believes that women do not have the capability to understand politics and that only men should be voting. And,
Wow.
And that is not something that you were hearing before this past election cycle. And
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
And a lot of the pictures that we've seen coming out of Washington, D.C. in the last few weeks have been very, very troubling. There was a meeting in the White House about a week and a half ago, and it was all men deciding whether or not we should be keeping maternity care, child care, pediatric care, mammograms in health insurance.
Right, lots of white men in that picture.
Exactly right. And
not that I have anything against white men, but
it's the idea that that room was not reflective of our population as a whole. So having people with only a certain mindset making decisions does not get us forward as a society.
Well, at the march, there were a couple of highlights for me. One was seeing a young 20-something-year-old woman who had a sign that said, "Trump, you have turned me into an activist," which just warmed my heart. And the other one was I passed a young family, and there's this little girl about 7 years old. And this little girl should become an opera singer someday because she has a set of lungs that you wouldn't believe. But she's like this tall, and she's belting out chants, and she's leading the chants for all of the marchers that are within earshot of her. She's going, "Tell me what democracy looks like," and the crowd's shouting back, "This is what democracy looks like," and everything. And her mother has tears running down her face, and I'm tearing up, because this child is our future, and it was very, very inspirational. I've been at a lot of marches, and they're all exhilarating. And when I was in Washington, I kept saying to people, I was at the People's Climate March in New York City in 2014, and there were 400,000 people there, and I kept saying, there are more people here today. There are more people here today. I mean, we were like this at times, and it was very, very exciting to be part of that energy.
And I thought one of the most interesting parts of that, because I did watch part of it some of the live broadcast that was happening before I actually ended up driving to Watertown to participate in the rally that was held in Watertown. Then I came back, is that the crowd, well, there was zero violence, there was zero negativity. It was all positive energy, and people really were supporting each other and very uplifting. And it was the kind, they were talking about the kinds of things that you and I think America is all about. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing in 2017 that we're looking at turning the clock back on all the progress that has been so fought for over the years, and to think that we can just lose that is very, very discouraging. So yeah, we're getting out in the streets, and we're writing our postcards, and we're making our phone calls, and we're not going to be quiet.
One of the other highlights for me at the march was there were a couple of Muslim women who were standing on a low wall, and people were photographing them, and they were saying thank you. So I walked up and I took their picture. And after I took their pictures, they said thank you to me, and I said, I just want you to know that we're with you. And one of the women stepped down and gave me this heartfelt hug and said thank you. And so when the march happened in Canton, after the first ban happened,
right,
I put on my sign, I put that picture of them and said, I am marching for them. I said, I promised them, I'm marching for them. And they've been in my heart so many times since then.
And that's what we've seen. We've seen the immigration ban. People have turned out on the street. We've seen people turn out on the street for health care, for reproductive rights, for everything including the environment, which is what we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. One of the things that actually happened before the Women's March was Bernie Sanders really started to mobilize people around the issue of health care. And we saw a tremendous outpouring of social activism around health care.
300 people in Canton showed up.
That's exactly right. And every congressional district in this country organized around health care prior to last week's non-vote, as it turned out, on Trump care. And so what you've seen is people have taken on activism in a way that I haven't seen since the 1960s, both for social justice movements like civil rights, a little bit later against the Vietnam War, and all of a sudden now people are just really understanding that they need to find their voice, they need to speak up, not just for themselves but for other people. So one of the things that since the Trump administration has been in office, they went after the environment right away. They used the Congressional Review Act, which is a 1996 law that gives lawmakers the power to nullify regulations within 20 days of enactment when a new administration comes in. So we've seen tremendous moving backwards on lots of issues around the environment, the EPA, all those kinds of things. One of the responses to that has been the March for Science, which is going to be happening on Earth Day on April 22nd. And the big march, of course, is in Washington, D.C., but there are also going to be local events, aren't there? So talk a little bit about some of those.
Well, right after the election, organizations like 350.org and Sierra Club, Greenpeace, and etc. started organizing for the People's Climate Mobilization, which is going to be in Washington, D.C. on April 29th. And then after the Women's March, there were some people that were saying, well, you know, women have been maligned, but you know who else has been maligned? Scientists. And so they said, you know, let's create a scientist march. And there was a little bit of conflict in terms of we can't have that on the state, you know, between the two marches. But the way it's been worked out is that on April 22nd, the scientist march is happening in Washington, D.C., and that's launching the week. And then the next weekend, on the 29th, is the People's Climate Mobilization, and it's culminating the week.
Okay.
So it's going to be okay, and we're doing the same in the North Country.
Right.
We have. I'm aware of a march in Watertown on the 22nd for the Scientist March, and as of this week, there's also one in Clifton Find. Somebody contacted me. Yeah.
Great.
And then on the 29th, we have People's Climate marches in Plattsburgh, in Syracuse, in Glens Falls, and here in Potsdam as well.
Okay.
And all of these marches that I just mentioned, both the Watertown and the Clifton Find and the ones on the 29th, We're all networking. We're talking together regularly, emailing back and forth. We have a common theme, which is we care and we're going to act. And we're going to share numbers with one another. We're going to be chanting some of the same chants and sending out some of the same messages. We plan to meet with elected officials as a group afterwards and speak as one group. And we also plan on, we want for people to leave. It's not enough to just come to the march. That's not enough. We really need to, it's about mobilization. So we want people to leave as part of a network of activists. And we recognize that most people are stressed out. You know, the typical person who comes that day will probably have 3 kids at home, is working full-time, and has an elderly parent who's in nursing home care.
Typical North Country family, you bet.
And so I get it that people don't have a lot of time. So our efforts will be to create an email, an action alert for that person. And it's going to be on Facebook. Our Facebook is New York Action Alert for the activists with a little time. And our email is NYactionalert@gmail.com. And the action alerts that come out, there's not going to be any articles, any big discussions, any fluff. It's going to be purely take action. Call your representative. Here's the number. Here's the bill number. Tell the person to oppose or support it. Here are 3 talking points. And if you have time, you can read the background. If you don't have time, you can read the top 3 inches, and you can take action in 2 minutes.
And that's actually a technique that lots of advocacy groups use. In fact, AAUW is, for years, has had what they call their 2-minute activists. The exact same setup in terms of that. So it's very effective. It's very quick. We have seen the healthcare bill was a terrific example of that. People calling day after day after day, not just one office, but all of the district offices in their congressional district, and repeating that message over and over and over again, how important it is that our representatives represent our needs and our best interest rather than sort of the corporate best interest. And it's interesting, I think, for the representatives who have been their phone systems have been completely overwhelmed, because for the last few years they have not gotten this kind of they haven't got this kind of response. So they're really not quite sure. Some of them have said, oh, well, they all must be paid activists. And of course, as you and I know, in the North Country, wouldn't that be funny? Those would be good paying jobs if we were getting paid to be activists, weren't they?
If you find out where I send my invoice to George Soros, please let me know.
That's exactly right. So you talk about the Science March on one Saturday and the People's Climate March on the second Saturday as the capstones. Is there activities during the week that people will be taking advantage of that you know of?
I have heard that nationally there are going to be some actions in between that. We don't have anything planned locally, and quite frankly, just planning for the 29th is when a major event. We plan on having music, and we're having speakers, we're having tables, we plan on having a voter registration table.
Oh, terrific. Yeah.
And we're hoping to have some other events as well. We hope to have a piñata for the children. We're going to have a big piñata that's like lump of coal, and we're going to break it open, and yellow sunlight is going to come out.
That will be a wonderful visual. And it's interesting because one of the I've been reading for the last few weeks about the Science March and scientists who are not, as a group, very political, and certainly not known for their political activism, have come to the conclusion that with science on the chopping block, they really need to start speaking out. And what I found very interesting is that they've also decided that for many of them they need to think about running for office. And so there have actually been some online trainings for scientists who are interested in running for political office, whether it's something very locally or maybe something at their state or at the national level. And that's one of the things that we're seeing, is that people have realized that if you're going to make changes, sometimes it means you have to change the leaders. And if the leaders you have aren't speaking for you and about your issues the way you want to hear, then maybe it's time to jump into the pool yourself.
One of my lines is, when the people lead, the leaders will follow.
And that is, that's always the truth, because very few politicians are going to put themselves out until they have a pretty good idea of where who's following them, because they're very risk adverse, and their main job is to get reelected. So you don't do that by annoying people or being out of step with where folks are. One of the interesting things about the current mobilization and the current activization is that people are really starting to speak out, and there's a lot of voices, and it's got to be pretty intimidating for people who are used to operating in a vacuum.
Yeah, two things with what you said about scientists. One of the things that I have noticed about scientists on climate change is that sometimes they're wrong. And when they're wrong, it's because they were too conservative.
Mm-hmm.
Their estimates were here, and then what actually happened was here, because they don't want to be exaggerating. And the one time that they say, oh, it's going to be here, and then it's actually only here, then this becomes political capital that you can use. So I find that their estimates tend to be conservative. So we should take those estimates very seriously and realize they are conservative estimates.
You know, it's interesting because in the last few years, you've read things from the scientific community saying, according to climate change, this will happen in 100 years, and you're seeing it happen in 10, 15, or 20 years because of the compression of time and the fact that each one of these changes is accelerating another part of change. So that's very that's a very good point.
One of the things I think people really need to understand about climate change is that it's a delayed reaction, and I don't think that people really get that. So if we stopped by some miracle, and it would be a real miracle, but if by some miracle we stopped burning all fossil fuels tomorrow, we would actually continue to see rising sea levels and rising temperatures for a considerably long time, because it's a delayed reaction. The effects that we are seeing today are not the results of today's emissions. They are the results of past emissions. Mm-hmm. And we need to understand that, because if we wait until things get really bad and then say, oh, maybe we should take care of this, we will have, it's too late. It is truly, truly too late. So we really need to get that.
Yeah, and so one of the things that, Ginger, that I wanted to ask you about was, you're going to be holding the climate march on the 29th of April, and that should be, we hope, winter should finally be behind us, and we will actually be into spring-like weather.
We've ordered a nice sunny day.
Have you? Oh, well, that's very important.
60 to 75 degrees, you know.
That sounds perfect.
George Soros is paying for that for us.
Maybe we should have held that today. We could have had nice weather today. So what are the outcomes that you're looking for that will mean to you that this has been a successful event? What are you looking at in terms of people coming out and signing up for some of the activities that you're talking about, and making the sort of change that we know needs to happen in order to start addressing these issues?
I'm a teacher by profession, and one of the things that I've learned as a teacher is that most of the results from my actions I never see.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm there. But what I would see ideally is that we have a lot of people sign up for our Facebook page. We have a lot of people sign up for that email action alert. And when we send out those alerts, that a lot of people pick up that phone and make that phone call. Mm-hmm. And that would be the best thing that would happen, because phone calls are known to be one of the most effective things you can do.
And you know, we've seen that locally here in the New York 21 Congressional District, that when folks have picked up the phone and called, it has affected how our representative votes.
It has.
And that's really, really critical, because otherwise the congressional representative is operating in a vacuum. If they haven't asked and they don't know what people want, mm-hmm. and we can't expect our representatives to do the right thing if we don't give them some direction. So this has been a great learning experience, I think, for lots of folks.
And I have seen, as you said, I've seen situations where I feel like we made a difference.
Oh, I think we have.
Well, look at the first thing that Congress was going to do was change the ethics rules.
Yeah, that's right.
And that the number one thing, we're going to get rid of the ethics thing.
And everybody howled.
Oh yeah, and
That's right.
and I think, you know, right there, that started a pattern.
So one of the things that happens, and I suspect that everybody who's sitting in Congress right now is praying that this will happen, is that people will get tired and they'll go away and they'll stop being active and they'll stop paying attention and they'll stop writing postcards and calling on the phone, which I don't think is going to happen, because it seems to me that what we've seen is people increasing their activism, not getting tired and going away. But how do we avoid burnout as activists and as citizens? How do we avoid burnout, and how do we not let frustration when we don't get the outcomes we want stop us from picking up the phone and keeping on? So, you know, what are your thoughts along those lines about how to avoid burnout and how to keep up the activism that we're going to need in order to be successful for the long haul?
You have hit on a very important thing. For myself, I am a dedicated meditator, and that's what helps me. But one of the things that I do, because I keep myself extremely well informed, and it is very easy to get overwhelmed. And what I do is I read something, and I think, are you kidding? And then I figure out what I need to do, and I pick up the phone, I make a phone call, and then I set it to the side, and I go for a walk, or something like that. So I kind of compartmentalize it. You know, I keep myself informed, I take the action, and once I've taken the action, or encourage others to take the action, I'm done.
You don't obsess about an issue and let it prey on your mind.
No, because I know that if I do, I won't be able to do it for the long haul. The other thing that I think is really important is that I was reading something that said that if you stay in a state of frenzied, outrage and things like that, that what will happen is your brain will actually take over, and it will protect you by turning down your outrage, and it will start to make what's going on normal. And so you must step back, turn off the media for a day or so, go see your mother, whatever, go to the lake, go for a hike or whatever. You have to take breaks from it, because otherwise you will burn out and your brain will take over and make sure that you step back from it one way or the other.
Right, and the one thing we don't want is for the completely abnormal to be normalized, exactly. Because then we will lose all sense of perspective as a country and as a society and as individuals. And there's been so much abnormal lately that it's beginning to feel exactly like that is happening, so that's good. One of the things I've noticed is that a lot of the people who are becoming activists now really don't have much experience in this field. They haven't done it in the past. They are needing to learn some skills that they maybe have never needed before. Those of us who've been doing this work for a long time have kind of know what works, what doesn't work, and understand how to be effective. But for a lot of folks, this is going to be new territory. So talk to us a little bit, Ginger, about how to be an effective communicator when you do pick up that phone and make your call.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to understand that it's perfectly enough to call up and say, I'm Jane Doe, I'm a constituent in Potsdam, New York, or whatever, and to say I am urging the Congresswoman to oppose H.R. 555, I'm going to make it up, and that's enough. That is actually literally enough to say I want her to oppose that bill, and they tally that. But in terms of other communication skills, sometimes when we're talking to others, sometimes when we're talking to a politician or whatever, there are some really important things to remember. As a teacher, I knew that if I said no running in the hallway,
they heard running in the hallway.
And what your brain just visualized was running in the hallway. And every muscle in your body just got ready to run in the hallway. And I learned to say, I want you walking in the hallway. So that applies to this as well. George Lakoff says, do not repeat lies. Because when you repeat a lie, you actually reinforce it. So, and he says to tell the truth instead. So an example of that recently, instead of saying Trump was misleading us when he said that Obama wiretapped the Trump Tower. Now when I think that, my brain visualizes Barack Obama going into Trump Tower and laying out wires or something, Instead, we should be saying that James Comey, leader of the FBI, the Senate Intelligence Committee, and then House Intelligence Committee and the Justice Department, as well as people from Obama's administration, have all said that there is absolutely no evidence that any wiretapping of Trump Tower occurred. We need to be stating the truth, that there was not surveillance going on. And the other thing that I've heard is that we lose when we go on the defensive, and we win when we go on the offensive. And they said defensive is trying to keep what we already have, and offensive is going for more. So an example of going on the defensive would be, I don't want to have, the Affordable Care Act removed. My son just got on health care for the first time in years, and I don't want to lose that. That's going on the defensive. Going on the offensive is saying, you know what, I want to go past the Affordable Care Act. I want universal health care for all. Just
single
like
payer.
Single payer, just
right.
like the majority of the nations have in the world.
That's right.
And so that being assertive and stating what you want.
Right,
really
and
important.
not being afraid to think big. Obviously not being afraid to think big. One of the things that people have talked about, someone who was involved in the Occupy movement a couple of years ago has said that marching is fine and advocating is fine, but if you really want to make effective change, you're going to have to run for office. You're going to have to put yourself out there and run for office. And I've just been reading the newspaper in the last few weeks. We have school board openings, we have village trustee openings, we have local mayor's races. There will, next in 2018, there will be, of course, everybody, the Assembly and the Senate are all up for election, and the House of Representatives is all up for election. Now, you might not want to start from ground zero and run for the House of Representatives, but you can certainly run for a local office. Find out what is involved, find out what the issues are, start taking care of your community, and then gain the skills you need to take the next step
and
go to the next and go to the next level. So that, I think, is also very wise advice for folks. Don't just get mad. Go run for office.
Right.
So
write a letter to the editor too.
Yes, those are great. Those are great, great techniques, because that helps to create the grassroots understanding of an issue and builds momentum for change. And we know that politicians read local newspapers all the time to find out what people are concerned about, what's happening in the communities, what people are saying, because that helps to formulate their positions when they go to vote on issues at the level. Remind everybody, Ginger, a little bit about the Local 350 Alliance, how to get involved, when your meetings are, that sort of thing, just as a refresher for all folks local.
We have a website, northcountry350.org, and that has our information on it. We meet on the third Tuesday of every month at 6:30. We have gone back to meeting at in the community room of the Civic Center. We had been meeting at the college, but we switched back to the Civic Center. And we would love to have more people come. We're a small group, we're an active group, but we're a pretty small group, and we would love to have more ownership on what we're doing.
Great.
We do a lot.
Yes, you do. Well, thank you for coming in. I hope that a lot of folks turn out for the People's March here in Potsdam, or any of the other marches that are going on around.
That's happening in Ives Park, at 1 o'clock on Saturday, April 29th.
And you have ordered good weather. So
yes.
Great chance for people to enjoy the sunshine. Thanks, Ginger, very much for coming in. These conversations are a production of North Country Matters, which is filmed here in the Fred W. Cleveland Computer Center of the Potsdam Public Library. The civic partners for this show are the American Association of University Women of St. Lawrence County, the St. Lawrence County unit of the League of Women Voters, and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters. Ginger, thank you so much. Good conversation.